get time, we can also discuss book 5. So basically, book 4 and 5, they deal with book 4 particularly, it deals with the late Renassa. Yesterday we discussed Renassa and how after Renassa we discussed the metaphysical group of words, and in the previous class, I mean the second class, we discussed Spencer, Edmund Spencer, who was from the Renassa. So when we discuss Unit 4, that is John Milton. So John Milton also, he can be also termed as a late Renaissance poet, probably the last Renaissance poet. So I don't think to repeat once again what exactly Renaissance means, because we have discussed something regarding Renaissance in our second class while discussing that Edmund Spencer. So as you know, Renaissance is a kind of new awakening in all spheres of life. It is political, it is economic, it is social, it is cultural, and how that spirit came to English society or English society from Italy in between 14th to 16th century. And in this 14th to 16th century, we got Spencer as the beginner and how he followed the tradition of Renaissance. And after Spencer, we had a group of poets. They were called the metaphysical poets. But they were also reflecting some of the Renaissance elements. But they were termed as metaphysical. So they were quite different. They were not a genre, they were a class. We discussed it. But when you come to John Milton, today we shall discuss, then John Milton is probably, or he is termed as the last Renaissance poet. I mean, Renaissance poem, or Renaissance poetry of English literature reached its culmination in the literary craftsmanship of John Milton. And let me tell you that the biography of John Milton includes um, since 1608 AD to 1674 AD. 1608 AD to 1674 AD. That means it is 17th century. And we discussed in the previous class that Renaissance covers 14th, 15th, and 16th century. So in 17th century, the influence of Renaissance was still continuing. So Renaissance element was still there, but it was in a very different direction, in a new direction. We can find a repetition of some Spencerian elements in the poem or in the poems of John Milton, but it was in a very minor way. But let me introduce you first Milton. Who is Milton? John Milton. That as I told you, John Milton's biography covers from 1608 AD to 1674 AD, and Milton does not belong strictly to the period which is conventionally identified as Renaissance. Because conventionally we identify Renaissance period from 14th to 16th century. And John Milton appears on the literary screen of English literature in 17th century. That is also because he was born in 1608. That means his literary craftsmanship would be, I mean, it could come into light during the second part of 17th century. So in that sense, we strictly cannot include John Milton conventionally, which is identified as Renaissance. But the diverse strains of thoughts and practices that are leveled as Renaissance had a lasting impression or lasting impact on John Milton. And dear learners, what were their thoughts and practices that were labeled as Renaissance? We have discussed a lot in our second class while we discussed Edmund Spencer. Even in spite of that, for the refreshment of your knowledge, let me repeat some of the elements of Renaissance so that you will be able to, grasp what I'm going to teach you today or to guide you today. That is, one of the important thing is the that is the Puritan attitude. The Puritan attitude means there was a protest, the spirit of Protestantism against the Roman Catholic practices or ecclesiastical practices of English society. That was one of the important points. And also when you come to Renaissance, let me tell you exactly what we mean by Renaissance. That Renaissance is a term used by the historians to refer to the period in English history, refer to the period in English history dating from the late 14th century in Italy. I told you that the spirit of Renaissance came from Italy to England by that fall of Constantinople and all that, the Savonarola, Piccola, Mirandola, they had brought. And it spreaded to other countries through 15th and 16th centuries. So the origin of the spirit of Renaissance in European continent was in Italy in the late part of 14th century, and it spreaded to particularly England or other parts of European countries in 15th and 16th centuries, and it reached its culmination, its highest point in 17th century England. And in the late part of 17th century, we find John Milton as the pioneer of British poetry, leading English literature at that time. So, in the works of John Milton, we find the reflection of Renaissance elements in a than a different way from Spencer. So, what was Spencer's technique so far as Renaissance was concerned, and what was the late Renaissance technique by John Milton? So, in that sense, we can say that Milton is the last great Renaissance poet. Is the last great Renaissance poet. Now, so what were the diverse trends of thoughts and practices that are leveled at Renaissance had a lasting impression on John Milton, and some of the main social and political transformations of the period influenced Milton's work significantly. Some of the important social and political transformations of the period influenced Milton's work significantly. So, if we look at that, then what do we find in that significant work or the significant influence of political and all those practices? So, in the previous class, we discussed the Renaissance. That what was Renaissance? That it was in the field of development or awareness, intellectual awareness, political awareness, cultural awareness, religious awareness of the people in a different situation. And during Spencer's time, we had discussed how the economy changed from agrarian sector to urban sector. Rural sector to urban sector, agrarian sector to industrial sector, and growth of commerce in London city, and all that. But during 17th century, during Milton's time, the image of Renaissance or the picture of Renaissance was a bit different. So, in that sense, let me introduce before you some of the elements related to Renaissance during Milton's time. So, dear learners, we should first make a clear-cut difference, contrast, and comparison of Renaissance during Spencer's time and Milton's times, because in between Spencer and Milton, we had a group that is metaphysical group. So let us forget them. Let us not take them. Our discussion is Renaissance poet. So Milton is the last Renaissance poet. We shall find some of the influences of the early Renaissance literary trends. So in the background of Renaissance during Milton's time, some new factors entered into English literature. That is, the interest of public, or the interest of the writers, or interest of the literary activities of the people in classical learning. Classical learning means old scriptures. Classical, grantha, what you say in Odia. Classical learnings, old scriptures. So there was the popularization and revival. Let us see, popularization and revival of classical learning in English society. A new interest took place. Suppose now these days you see when our COVID-19 situation is running on and that Corona situation is running on, how people requested the government to retelecast Ramayana, Mahabharata, etc. The religious because people who during a time of crisis, during a time of situation, people sometimes get interested towards the classical learning, the mythological idea, so that it can nurture some of their spiritual yearnings to get some pleasure in life. Similarly, during the time of Renaissance, later part of probably the last part of Renaissance in English society, and why it was because there was a political unrest. We shall come to that section later on. So the first point that I'm going to introduce before you is that the popularization and revival of classical learning, and so that is that began that popularization and revival of classical learning. I mean to study classics with a new point of view. So they revived classics. What? Not just to read it, not for the sake of reading it, but for the sake of interpreting the idea of classics in terms of the modern political, economic, and religious situation. That we shall discuss how Milton did that. Then this popularization and revival of classical learning, it began with the discovery. It began with the discovery of new interest in writing. So what were the classics? The new interest in the writings of ancient Greece, Greek mythology, Greek classics, and the Bible. So interest of the writers, poets, was for the writings of the classical writings of the ancient Greece and the widespread Latin scholarship of the Middle Ages. So two things I'm repeating once again: the popularization and revival of classical classical texts or classical books, particularly from the texts of ancient Greek mythologies of the Greek people and the Bible. The Bible. The second thing is that there was a widespread of Latin scholarship because like in our India, now Sanskrit is our original language. Similarly, in England, you find Latin is their classical language. So government introduced that is Latin scholarship to the intellectuals, to the scholars. So when you read Latin, obviously you will go to the classical books. So as a result of which, the classical books or the classics, they got a scope to be popularized, but in what way? Not to read and interpret in the traditional way, but to interpret the stories of the classical books in the contemporary political interpretation. You can suppose you take Mahabharata and the story of Mahabharata, you can interpret in today's context, in relation to today's political situation. Similarly, they revived the classics on the basis of the contemporary socio-economic and political situation, and it helped them because of the printing press. There were a lot of publications of these works made by the English writers, supported by or based on the classical writings. So uh,
Sir,
this is the
excuse me,
yes.
sir.
Hmm.
This is block 4 running now.
Well, yes, block for running.
Okay,
Block
sir.
for running. In page 10, you can find in block
Okay,
4, page 10, you can find this thing.
okay, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Then, after that revival and popularization of classical learning, we can find the development and centering of intellectual attention on human rather than divine objects. That means while interpreting, when we interpret classics, suppose we interpret classics, we give importance to the character of Sri Krishna, we give importance to the character of Arjuna or all that big characters. But when the classics of the European classics, the Greek classics, that were revived by the English writers, they did not give more emphasis on the divine characters, the godly characters. Rather, they gave more emphasis on the human beings, the human characters, because the political situation, why that happened, I will discuss. Because the political situation of England was demanding for that. Then let there be a new interpretation. Let there be a different interpretation of classical mythologies, of classics, in terms of the contemporary sociopolitical or sociocultural situation. So, importance or attention or intellectual focus was made not on the divine objects but on human beings while interpreting the classics or while presenting the classics before the readers or before the audience. So this is the first point. In the first point, there are 2 points. The first in the first point of classical learning, the sub point is the popularization and revival of classical learning in the new mode of interpretation. In the second sub point of that classical learning is that intellectual focus or intellectual attention was on human rather than on divine objects. Now, I'm coming to the second point. Second point is reformation. As you know, that I had discussed reformation in Spencer's class, that officially reformation in England records a date, that is 31st October 1517. But you see, Milton is available to us in the scenario of British poetry in the late 17th century. So Reformation has already started in English society before 100 years, and within these 100 years, what were the effects or consequences or results of the Reformation, which has which had gone through in these 100 years. The first point is the first point of Reformation is what Reformation in the latter part of Renaissance age or 17th century is the upheaval in Christianity is referred to as the Reformation. The upheaval of Christianity, the growth of Christianity. So, dear learners, what was that Christianity? Christianity ordinarily means or originally means Roman Catholic practices. Okay, so in the Roman Catholic practices or the ecclesiastical practices, the subject of Bible, the subject of Bible or what is written in the Bible was full and final. So the Roman Catholic practices were strictly on the guidance of or strictly on the basis of the Bible. But as you know, during the Reformation, when we discussed Spencer, we know that the Protestant spirit for the first time emerged in the ecclesiastical or religious practices of the English people. What was that Protestant spirit? That for the first time, the Roman Catholicism faced the challenge, faced the opposition, or faced the protest by a group of people regarding the genuineness of God, regarding the genuineness of human behavior or mannerism, or regarding the genuineness of the ecclesiastical practices to be made or were practiced by the Christian people or English people. I mean, God faced challenge. So why God should be the supreme power, why God should be the supreme ruler of the entire universe. So we shall discuss this question in the later part. So Reformation, in a very simple or nutshell, you can say the Reformation means the upheaval in Christianity, growth in Christianity, not in the traditional sense of the term, but it was on the basis of the Protestant spirit which raised question and challenge on the practices and beliefs of Roman Catholicism. So, as a result of which, we find there were a series of attacks. It is not physical attack. There were a series of spiritual attack, moral attack, religious attack on the Catholic institutions or Roman religious institutions of Roman Catholic churches. And the proliferation of this breakaway, the proliferation of breakaway was made on different Catholic sects and Catholic cults. Cult, the sub part of religion, like we have Jagannath cult, is a part of Hindu religion. So different sects, different groups, religious groups, and different cults. And probably most of you might have heard the name of Martin Luther, who is the founder of Protestant. Christians are of two groups, Roman Catholic and Protestants. You find the CL Church, they are the Protestant church. So Martin Luther, who appeared in the whose life period is from 1483 to 1546. So Martin Luther, who for the first time raised a question on the practices of, on the supremacy of God, or on the supremacy of the ecclesiastical guidance given or advised by the Roman Catholicism in the Old Testament as well as New Testament of the Bible. So what was the argument of Martin Luther? Because he protested the Roman Catholic practice, his groups were called, or his followers were called Protestant. Because the protest, what did the protest? They protest the ecclesiastical practice advised by Roman Catholicism. So according to
Sir, excuse me, sir.
yes,
Practice mean
religious practice.
religious practice.
Yes,
And
ecclesiastical practice means the practices, religious practices related to church.
yes, and which type of practice at that time they were doing, sir? The people, and why the Martin Luther and their followers are going against the Pope?
The practice, I mean, you see that before the translation of Bible, whatever the whatever the Pope or the Father or the clergyman, they were advising the people, they were following it blindly. Even the kings and queens are also guided by the Roman Catholic advice. So
Okay, sir.
when Bible was translated into English, people had a direct access to the book, a direct access to the classic, the Bible, and they could find that whatever was told to them previously, that is quite different from what is exactly written in the Bible. So they found that there is something wrong. They had wrongly been interpreted by the earlier practice. So they protested it, and Martin Luther was the leader, or Martin Luther was the voice of these people. So they were called Protestant group. So
Okay, sir.
how the protest is there in the works of John Milton, we shall see.
Okay, thank you,
Okay.
sir.
Okay. So according to Martin Luther, um, um, the meaning of protest or the Protestant spirit is that the path of salvation. Salvation means moksha, the path of salvation. Every human being wants for salvation because we need moksha or we aspire moksha at the end of our life. So the path of, according to Martin Luther, the path of salvation did not lie through church. Church is not the media, or church is not the via media through which we can attain salvation, or by visiting church or be a church goer. Not is not essential for our life, but salvation can be achieved through an individual by the acceptance and obedience, by the acceptance and adherence of the Holy Scriptures. It is not the acceptance of the Holy Scriptures or adherence to the Holy Scriptures. So, what is salvation? Salvation is a matter of individuals' direct and unmediated relation to God. So, we can have the direct contact with God through prayer. It is not necessary that you can do the prayer. What was done in the earlier practices, that people were visiting the church and they were not allowed to make a they were convinced in such a way that they needed the help of the clergymen, they needed the help of the church people for prayer, with a yearning, with a yearning or for salvation. So, I mean, the Roman Catholic practice emphasized on the mediation of church. So, church was remaining in between an individual and God as a via media, as if salvation was not, granted to a person, or one cannot attain salvation without the mediation of the church. Church means the people who are attached to the church. So why this? Because Martin Luther said that it is salvation is not necessary through church. Salvation is not necessary through our acceptance and adherence to the Holy Scriptures. Yes, you can truly go through the Holy Scriptures. Whatever is properly guided by the Holy Scriptures, that can be practiced, but not what is misinterpreted by the persons or the clergymen or the people who are related to the church. I mean, very in a simple word, let me tell you that Martin Luther discarded, he rejected the mediation of the church in between person and God for attending salvation. So, how the direct contact of an individual and a God is there, that Milton has tried to explain in his most famous work, The Paradise Lost. And Paradise Lost can be explained in one little sentence, that Paradise Lost is about the way of God to man. I mean, how God and man, I mean, human being, they are related. That book explicates, and that book explains this religious question, which is, of course, an allegorical representation of the political scenario of the time. I will explain it. So, what happened in Martin Luther's Protestant spirit, or the Protestant view, that the rejection of the mediation of church was emphasized open. And the second thing is that we find here that there was a protest in the ideology, and as a result of the protest in the traditional ideology, there was the emergence of bourgeois. Bourgeois means, as I told you in my second class, bourgeois means the middle class. And how the middle class emerged in English society, that we discussed in the second class, that it emerged because of the change of economy from the agrarian sector to industrial sector, from the rural sector to urban sector. The poor farmer, the peasants, were working in the fields of the landlords. how they migrated to different towns and different cities to work as industrial laborers, and they developed economically, and they uplifted their economic status from lower class or poor class to middle class, and that middle class has been termed as bourgeois. Bourgeois. That is called bourgeois. Means the middle. It is a economic term, bourgeois. So all across Europe, there was the emergence of bourgeois, and they probably became the dominating group of people to interfere in politics of the time. And these bourgeois class, they sought, they wanted economy, they wanted economic development, and they wanted autonomy, self-rule, not to be ruled by the king, but to make their own government. So you see that when there was an awakening, there was a renaissance, or there was a self-awareness in the mind of the people, and how the growth of the middle class that generated some new ideas into their mind. And what did they aspire for? They aspired for autonomy in politics, trade, usury, money investment, autonomy in politics, autonomy in trade and commerce, autonomy in usury, etc., which was which was frowned by, disliked by the Catholic Church. Catholic Church never allows the practice of usury. Usury, you know, that you mortgage, giving somebody you give loan to somebody and you take a heavy amount of interest, and that is usury. So these are totally not approved by the Catholic practices. But because the society was getting into a different direction, the middle class people wanted that. Let me repeat once again three words which are important. One is autonomy in politics, autonomy in trade and commerce, autonomy in usury. And they were frowned by, disliked by, rejected by, disapproved by, discarded by the Catholic Church.
Sir, third one.
Third one is usury. USUARY. Usury means ଆମେ ଯୋଉ ବନ୍ଧକ ରଖିକରି ପଇସା ଦଉ, so that is
Okay, sir.
usury.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
So now here comes a big question. Here comes a big question in the political scenario of England. That is, let me explain that question of that is political economy. Sorry, political autonomy. So what is that political autonomy? Autonomy, you understand? Self-rule. Self-rule. Okay. So when the middle class demanded for political autonomy, this was a protest. Protest against what? Protest against the monarchy, Rajatantra monarchy, ruled by the king. So England has a system that the throne of England is always occupied by a king. And who was the king? Who was the king? The king was the son of the king. So it is a traditional go. It was a traditional go, or it was the conventional situation that a king's son will be the next king, or he will be occupying the throne. So when that was their practice, and that is also approved by, that is also sanctioned by the Catholic practice of life, because the Catholic practice of life says that, or it preaches that God is the supreme ruler of the entire universe. This is the Catholic belief. I mean, God is the permanent ruler of heaven, and the entire universe is under the authority of, under the control of, or you may say, under the divine administration of God. So similarly, when you come to the throne of England, then the throne of England is permanently occupied by a royal dynasty, Rajavamsa, a royal dynasty. And that royal dynasty is ruling the people of entire England from generation to generation by, by transferring the throne to their successor or to their next generation. That is, the king's son will be the next king. Whether he is eligible, whether he is capable, or whether he is efficient, that is immaterial. Once you are born to be the eldest son of the king, then you are supposed to be, or you are very much, you are assured with the kingship after the death of your father. So this practice is approved by the Roman Catholic practice because God is permanent there as the ruler. So here also, the king, the royal dynasty is the permanent ruler, and this term is called divine right theory. In political terminology, we call it divine right theory. Why it is divine right theory? Divine right means you are born as the son of a king. That means it is sanctioned by the divinity. So you have no choice to be born as the son of a king or the son of a beggar. It is the plan of the God. So when you are born as the son of a king, when you are the prince, that means it is the plan of the God. So when it is the plan of the God has planned to arrange your birth to be made in the king's family. So you have the right to become the king. So and it is the will of the God and it is the divine will of the God. So people have to accept it, people have to obey it, and people have to follow it. So that is what is divine right theory. But when the Protestant spirit emerged, and there was the emergence of the bourgeois class, and they wanted autonomy in politics, they for the first time challenged this theory of divine right. That they demanded, or they claimed, or they interpreted that why should the king's son be the king? Why not the best male available in the entire kingdom? So the best among the male, the more there are many people who are more eligible, who are more efficient, and who are more capable than the son of a king. So why not the throne of the England should go to the best one? So that is where the people wanted to bring their leader come up for a new kind of political reorientation in the contemporary British situation. So you see how that ecclesiastical practice of the Catholic, the Catholic design that was challenged in political field also. So that is what is an important term to be understood. For the first time, the Protestant spirit raised a voice against the divine right theory as a result of the emergence of the bourgeois class, who sought for the political autonomy. Then, so this is an important point. We shall discuss it while we shall discuss the work of John Milton. Then the third point is the emergence of imperialism. So during 17th century, and I mean during the time of Milton, that European people discovered various new continents, various new countries on the globe. They explored through navigation to different places of the world. As you know, Sir Thomas Roe came to India in 1612 during the time of Shah Jahan. So this exploration through navigation, the discovery of different sea routes that was made by the British people. So they explored some of the parts of African continents, Asian continent, Australia, America. In 1492, Columbus discovered the sea route to America. So when Milton appeared on the literary screen of the British people, we find here that the European discovery of various new continents took place and on the different countries of the globe. And what was their intention? Their intention was for trade and commerce and for new settlements to extend their colonial power, to extend their imperial power. So you see, when a group of people or when the imperialism extended through colonialism by the British people, then they came in contact with they came in contact with different cultures. And now when they went to different parts of European continent or African continent or America or Australia, then it was not easy to go there. You have to find a sea route. You have to fight against the adverse weather condition in the sea. You have to travel. You have to make a voyage for a long time. So you have to make a heroic journey, adventurous journey, or you have to make an exodus with your imagination to discover new lands, to discover new places, to discover new people, and to establish your authority there through diplomatic trade, through commercial trade, or through different trades as it is available to you. So here comes an important question that when you explore different lands, then you have to be heroic, you have to be adventurous, you have to be imaginative, and you have to be confident. So these are the qualities that you find in the character of an epic hero. Epic hero. You go to Mahabharata, you'll find these elements of heroism, elements of adventure, elements of exploration, elements of confidence, elements of imagination in the characters like Arjuna, characters like Bhima, characters like different characters. You go to Ramayana, you will find it in the characters like Ram, Lakshman, and all that. You go to Iliad, you will find the same type of subject matter. You go to Odyssey, you go to Divine Comedy, you go to any epic, you will find these characters. So the epic dimension of literature was very much there during the time of Milton because of the extension of imperialism of the British people to different islands. So this is one of the important subject matter of the literary technique of John Milton. Then uh, when you go to a place that you don't know, Columbus was going to America. He did not see. He had not seen America, where it is, where it was, or how it was. He did not know. But with some speculations, with some imagination, with some confidence, he was extending the horizon of his, extending the horizon of his imagination to the new geographies, to the new people, to the new places. So, what was the reason for that? What was the purpose? Extension of or enrichment of economy and enrichment of imagination. They can plunder or they can loot the natural resources of the area. They can settle there with new settlement to rule there. They can find they can find new economic establishment, and gradually they can extend their power of administration, that is imperialism. So these qualities, previously I told you about the Puritan spirit of voice against the divine right theory. In the next, that is the emergence of imperialism, we find the epic quality. Epic quality means adventure, imagination, confidence, heroism, all those things. Then the next point in the later Renaissance period of Spencer that we find is the new cosmology. New cosmology, dear learners, we have already discussed that new cosmology. What are the new cosmology? That the Ptolemaic system was there, which was geocentric. The Ptolemaic system believed that the Earth is the center, Sun is moving. That we discussed in the previous class. I also discussed a poem of Sun Rising of John Donne with you. So that the old idea of cosmology changed into new cosmology by the publication of Copernican theory in the year 1543. 1543. The publication of Copernican theory was there in 1543, and that book proposed a heliocentric universe. That means sun at the center and the other planets are moving around the sun, and Earth is one of that. And that was further advocated by or further established by, supported by the other astrologers like Kepler and Galileo, and that became confirmed. So this new cosmology means the position of the Earth, the position of the Sun, and the position of other planets, that became a subject of interest for the writers or for the poets, including Milton. What he has very much reflected in his most famous work, The Paradise Lost. That the next point is the celebration of region of scientific method in the pursuit of knowledge, reason to be rational, celebration of reason of scientific method. We talked about empirical science in the previous class. Empirical science, I mean fact-based science, experiment-based science. So reason or the genuineness or experimentation of the knowledge was celebrated through scientific method. To scientific method in the for the pursuit of knowledge. That is why when you read the poems of John Milton, you will find a lot of similes and metaphors that are used in his poem by taking comparisons from scientific knowledge. They will give you the idea that how Milton was taking examples, taking comparisons from scientific knowledge. So, dear learners, I think that I should tell you a little about that simile and metaphor, what Milton uses in his poem. What is simile and what is metaphor? Very simple. That simile is an explicit comparison or direct comparison between two objects based on some similarities or based on some similar features. Two objects will be compared directly because they have some commonness. And while you make the comparison, you will use as or like, like. Take for example, he is as brave as a lion. He is as brave as a lion, or he is like a lion. So here, he, the person, and lion, an animal, are compared on a particular similarity of bravery, of that bravery. He is as brave as a lion, or he is like a lion. So here the quality is compared, and the comparison is explicit, open. Okay, so it is a direct comparison. But when you use the same idea in a metaphor, then you are not going to use as and a like. So obviously, your comparison will be indirect. So metaphor is an indirect comparison between two objects, or be an implicit comparison between two objects based on a similar point without the use of as or like. The same sentence I am using as a metaphor. He is a lion. He is a lion. So here you have to find out why he is a lion. What point has been compared? So if you have the knowledge or if you have the idea, then you can say that lion is a brave animal, the king of the jungle. So he is compared with the lion because he is like he's a brave one. So here the comparison is becoming indirect. Yesterday also I was giving the dirty dog stole away my purse. So the dirty dog was a metaphor because the dirty dog is a person and the dirty dog stole away my purse. So the dirty dog is a person. A person is compared with a dirty dog without any word like as or like. If I make that a simile, that he is like a dog who stole away my purse, or he is jumping like a monkey, that is simile. He is a monkey. This is metaphor. So anyway, so you will find a lot of similes and metaphors used in the poems of John Milton, which are mainly displaying his interest or his knowledge or his pursuit of knowledge on rational science or empirical science of his time. So when Milton wrote his poem, he had tried his best to reflect all the Renaissance elements with a very refined vein, in a very sophisticated vein. That is why he is probably the best of the Renaissance poet and last of the Renaissance poets. Then, a very, very important point that is related to the contemporary politics. You should very much uh, remember it or get it. That is discourse of civic rationality. Discourse of civic rationality. What is that civic rationality? Okay, that as I was telling you regarding the divine right theory. What is divine right theory? The divine right theory was that the king's son will be king. I mean, the ruler of a throne is predetermined, and as if it is a divine sanction, so you have to accept it. You have to grant it. Whether you are willing or you are not willing, that doesn't matter. So, when there was a growth of bourgeois class, then we find there was a there was there was the voice of protest because of the Protestant spirit. The voice of protest was that the people challenged the monarchical authority of the king. So this voice of protest against the divine right theory was made by a popular figure of the time who was Oliver Cromwell. I have taken the name Cromwell in my previous class. So Oliver Cromwell, who was whose biography covers from 1599 AD to 1658. 1599 AD to 1658 AD. So who was this Oliver Cromwell? Oliver Cromwell was an English general. I mean, he was in the army, English general and statesman. He was involved in army and also he was involved in politics. So during the time of Protestant spirit gradually gaining momentum in English society, Oliver Cromwell led the Parliament of English armies against King Charles. So people were united and Oliver Cromwell, along with another statesman, that is Mr. Fairfax. So both of them garnered the support of public to overthrow the king from the throne and to run the Parliament of Britain or the English Parliament by a people's government. So this was a direct challenge to the divine right theory. So this was a crude outcome of the Protestant spirit prevailing in the English society. So Oliver Cromwell promised the people of England that he would give them a better administration. He would give them a better government than King Charles I. So that was a kind of civic rationality of the people that they supported Oliver Cromwell and they sought for a new type of government, and this was possible, or this was a consequence of the spirit of Protestantism, the Protestant spirit, an upcoming spirit in the late Renaissance period of England. And this is a period when, for the first time, we find there was the popularization of a new literary genre. The new literary genre was criticism. Till now, till late 17th century, we have poetry, we have drama, and we have prose. As Francis Bacon's prose, I was telling you in the previous class. So prose was there, drama was there, poetry was there, but novel has not yet come. So another kind of a mode of literature was introduced in the society of England, that was criticism. The criticism was based on the political criticism and cultural criticism. And Milton was an early exponent, powerful exponent of that criticism, because you can find one of his works that is religio laici, that is a political criticism of that time. So we find that a different trend was developing in the literary scenario of England at that time, and the power of vision was explored. So, dear learners, you'll be confused if at this moment, if I do not introduce the masterpiece of John Milton before you to analyze all these points. That you see that John Milton's masterpiece of Paradise Lost, which is a classics based on the based on Virgil's Aeneid. The Greek poet Virgil's epic Aeneid. So Milton based his famous work, The Paradise Lost, on the classical model of the Greek poet Virgil's work Aeneid, A-N-E-I-D, Aeneid. He wrote it in 1667 when he was completely blind and he was in the jail, because Milton was a supporter of Cromwell, and Cromwell's rule in England. Of course, they dethroned Charles I, and Cromwell ruled England up to 1758. So after 1758, the supporters of Cromwell, they were put in the jail. They were put behind the bars. So Milton, being totally blind, remaining in the jail, remaining behind the bars, he wrote his most famous poem, The Paradise Lost. In 1667, it was published. And that book was genuinely a book openly declaring the protest against the divine right theory and the parliamentarian form of government, against the monarchy, against the rise of middle class, and the activities of Cromwell, all that. Because John Milton wanted to highlight Cromwell in that book and his ideologies in that book by distinctly presenting the fight between God and Satan by taking the story from the classics, that is the Bible. So John Milton selected the story or selected the plot from a classics, that is Bible. And the story is from the Genesis story, how men and women were created and how they were sent to the earth, and how we are their offspring. So this biblical story, this Genesis story, Milton chose because of the interest in classical books, classical works. As I told you, interest and popularization in classical books. So what is happening? It is purely based on the epic model. So dear learners, let me tell you what is epic. Epic is a long narrative, heroic poem. It is a long. You see, Ramayana is an epic. You see, Mahabharata is an epic in our India, great epics. So epic is a long heroic poem, and it is available in volumes. You cannot find it in one book. It is always more than one book, and it is ideally it is a combination of 7 books. Sometimes you may find more, sometimes you may find less. Satakhanda Ramayana we say. So ideally 7 books, and it is a long heroic poem based on a saga. It represents a cultural value, a religious value of a society, and more books are there, volumes are there, volume 1, volume 2, like this, and always the plot of epic is based on the difficult journey or exodus of the hero. The hero will never get a peaceful life. The hero will go through different difficulties. Why? For the establishment of, for the search of a new imaginative value for the society. They represent some newer value to bring into the society. And the next, and you see Ram is there, Arjuna is there, they are never settled. Most of the time they are engaged in the adventurous tasks, fighting with demons, fighting with all adversities of life. So finally, they establish some value in the society. Then an epic. So how did this idea came to the mind of Milton? As I told you, because of the attempt of imperialism. The British people were going through the sea for the discovery of new islands. So it was like a heroic journey. Go go through difficulties. Go to make voyage through adversities, to find new culture, to face the new people and all that. So the imperialistic spirit is a spirit of epic quality that we find here. And an epic does not start regularly. It will not start from the beginning. An epic always starts in the middle. So you find that when an epic starts, the story is not systematic. In the first volume, you will find from the middle of the story it will start, and further on you will find the beginning of the story will be coming to the plot as the background reference or as the flashback and all that. You see Ramayana. When Ramayana is beginning, that Valmiki is writing, Valmiki, Sita is in the ashram of Valmiki. That is the beginning of Ramayana. But Ramayana does not start there. The true story of Ramayana starts from Dasarath, when Ram is born and all that. So the story has passed to a greater extent. But from there it started and it referred to the back. Similarly, when you go to Milton's Paradise Lost or any of the epic, you will find the story does not start from the beginning. It always abruptly starts, irregularly starts from the middle. So before the beginning of the story, before the beginning of the plot, the poet makes an invocation to the divine muse, because it is usually believed by the epic poets that they cannot write an epic from their own mind, because epic is such a vast, such a magnanimous work, such a task that it is impossible without the inspiration from the divine muse. So while they begin the epic, they make a prayer, they make an invocation to the divine muse. Then they start the story from the middle. The story grows forward through some heroic deeds, and there is a hero who represents some value, and he goes forward, and finally he establishes some cultural ethos. So in that sense, if we come to Paradise Lost of Milton, then we will be surprised to see that when he has taken the Genesis story from the Bible, then what is the conventional belief? The conventional belief is that God is good, but in Paradise Lost, God is not good. In Paradise Lost, the idea is a contrast, because Milton very much presents Satan as the hero, Satan as the hero, and God as the villain. So why? Because Milton was a supporter of Cromwell, influenced through Protestant spirit, and, and throwing a challenge to the divine right theory. So when God is the permanent ruler, then it is almost a kind of divine right theory. And Satan is challenging God. Satan is challenging God that why God should be the permanent ruler. Why not a chance to me? If I get a chance, if God gives me an opportunity, then I can prove that I am a better ruler than God. So a it is purely a Cromwellian theory. It is purely a Protestant theory. That it is purely a challenge to the divine right theory. So when book one opens, we find Satan has been thrown away from heaven to the hell by God. So the rebellion has already taken place. Satan has raised his voice, and Satan, because God was more powerful, God has thrown Satan from heaven to hell. And at the beginning of book one, Satan is addressing his followers in hell at pandemonium, that now God is more powerful. We cannot fight against God, but we must take up the challenge. How can we defeat God? How can we occupy the throne? We cannot occupy the throne, but at least we can defeat God. We can demoralize God, and that will be considered as our win or as our victory. So, book one opens by John Milton by presenting Satan as an epic hero. Why is an epic hero? Because the speech that he is giving to his followers at Pandemonium is justifying his rebel against God. That what does Satan want? Satan wants a parliamentarian form of government, not a monarchical form of government, not an autocratic form of government. God is an autocrat, and God is a monarch, and God is permanently there, and it justifies the rule of divine right. So why not chance to others to see whether bad or good? But Satan was thrown down, and at last in the meeting, it was decided that they cannot make an open revolt, they cannot fight God openly. So they will destroy the best creation of God, so that God will be treated as defeated, and God will be demoralized. So Satan finally took the leadership, and that he would go to the Garden of Eden, where the best creation of God, that is man and woman, the first man and the first woman, Adam and Eve, are left there. So he will prompt them, he will instigate them, and he will pollute their mind to defy God, to disobey God, so that God would be demoralized and defeated. So now Satan makes his journey from hell to earth. Satan is thrown away from heaven. In hell, he makes the plan, and from hell to earth, he makes the journey. So this journey of Satan makes him an epic hero, because this journey is an expedition. This journey is a voyage, and this journey, and what kind of voyage? A voyage through space. Satan is going from hell to earth to space, facing a lot of adversities. So this is giving him the quality of an epic hero. He's Satan, but Milton presents him as an epic hero. And how, like all epic heroes, he faces trouble, he faces adversities, but he's determined with his due sense of imagination, he's determined with his courage and confidence to reach Ark. So he reaches Ark. He reaches the Ark, and he reaches at the Garden of Eden, and he finds an Adam and Eve are innocently there playing in the Garden of Eden. So Satan guises himself into a snake. So he takes the guise of a snake, takes the guise of a python, and he crawls in the garden. So in Christian imagery, you find snake is an auspicious symbol. So, but in Hindu mythology, snake is not auspicious. It is the attire of Lord Shiva and all that. So anyway, so when he goes to the garden, he in the Garden of Eden, he finds Adam and Eve. They are very much engaged in their innocent world of togetherness. So why they are like that? Because God had instructed Adam and Eve that they should remain in the Garden of Eden as his best creation, but they should not eat the fruit of knowledge. There was a tree of knowledge. The tree of knowledge was loaded with fruits, apple-like fruits, and the fruits are the fruit of knowledge. God has strictly prohibited, God has strictly restricted them never to take, never to eat the fruit of knowledge. So that was the obedience to God practiced by Adam and Eve since they are left in the Garden of Eden. So when Satan reached there, he saw them playing, he saw them staying totally naked. So he understood that, Satan understood that Adam and Eve are innocent because they are not ashamed of their nakedness. If you find a small child of 6 months old or 1 year old or 1.5 year old, he or she is not ashamed of nakedness because they are totally innocent. But Adam and Eve are grown up. They were not child, but they were innocent. Why they were innocent? Because they did not have the knowledge to realize sin. And God had not allowed them to realize sin. Let them remain innocent, ignorant. So Satan went there and he tempted Adam, the male, to eat the fruit of knowledge. He tried to tempt him, tried to convince him, but Satan did not take. He was very much rigid to the advice, or was very much rigid to the stricture of God. So Satan could know that man cannot be convinced. This male cannot be convinced. So he finally changed his mind and he tried to convince Eve, and he succeeded. So in Christianity, women are considered to be inferior to male because they can easily be convinced, they can easily be seduced. So after the temptation, after the instigation created in the mind of Eve, now Eve pushed Adam that they should eat the fruit of knowledge, and finally they did that, and Satan became very happy that his idea is going to be fulfilled or he is going to win his target. So finally, Adam and Eve ate the fruit. So when they took the bite of that fruit of knowledge, then immediately knowledge entered into their mind. And they were immediately aware of, they became immediately conscious of their nakedness. They felt ashamed of that, ashamed of each other, that how they are moving naked. So immediately they hide their bodies with some leaf and all that. Satan looked at it, he was happy, and he came back with a winning heart that he had destroyed the best creation of God. So you see, if we interpret this theory, then two meanings will come up from it. The first is that whether we obey God or not, the Catholic theory says that we must obey God and we obey God blindly. But when Adam and Eve obeyed God blindly, they were unable to attain civilization because remaining naked is uncivilized, and to cover up our body is a mark of civilization. So the Renasa spirit, the Renasa element emphasizes on the point that Satan is our father to make us civilized. Because if Satan had not visited that spot, not instigated them to eat the fruit of knowledge, we would have remained naked till today. So Satan in that sense is our father to make us civilized. But in the Roman Catholic sense, it is a defiance to God. It is a disobedience to God. So it is a sin. So which one is correct? So that controversy is the main point of the late Renasa period or late Renasa theory. So after all, when God visited, because God was a regular visitor to Garden of Eden to see whether his creation is okay or not, whether that male and female is okay or not. So when the next time he visited there, he did not find Adam and Eve. So he developed some doubt. Now he called for them. He called them. They did not appear before him. And they gave reply by hiding behind the bush. So God saw that half-eaten fruit is lying on the ground. So he immediately understood that they had disobeyed his order. They have eaten the forbidden fruit of knowledge, and they have realized they are ashamed of their nakedness. After some time, they appeared before the God by covering their body with leaves. Satan has already left by that time. So God was so dissatisfied that he cursed them. That, what is the curse? He cursed them that they are left on the earth permanently with their generations, and they are not allowed to go to heaven henceforth. And they will remain on the earth to suffer because of their disobedience. The suffering is death, disease, mental agony, etc., etc., etc. So we suffer on this earth. So the Catholic theory, the Roman Catholic theory says that we suffer on the earth. We are born to suffer on the earth because of the curse of God. And through our suffering, we can satiate our sin. So that can be compensated through prayer, through mediation of the church, because the church people are the mediator of God. But Protestant spirit, the Protestant theory does not support it. So this is a new spirit, a new theory, and Milton very much took this story from the Genesis theory of the Bible, but his presentation of the story is totally different on the basis of the Renaissance spirit, Renaissance style. Now, why did he present Satan as the hero? Because it is a kind of allegorical representation. Paradise Lost justifies the ways of God to man. Okay, but at the same time, Paradise Lost is also an allegorical representation of the political scenario of England of his time. Because who is Satan? Satan is Oliver Cromwell. And Oliver Cromwell is challenging the divine right theory, that is the monarchical form of government, and Oliver Cromwell could succeed. Similarly, Satan could succeed. So Milton's Paradise Lost should not be read just as an epic, rather it should be read as a masterpiece of late Renaissance period, representing all Renaissance elements in it magnificently. Though it is appearing as an epic, it is also an allegorical epic. The style is epic style, but it does not contain.
Sir, the allegorical epic is a sonnet also.
No, sonnet is 14 lines. Sonnet is 14
Okay.
lines. Epic is voluminous. You can get 14 books. Okay. So it can be considered as an allegorical epic of its time. So it is written in a very different design. So Renaissance trait and the celebration of the human as divine being is rather than a rational being. So Milton presents that the human being is a creation of God. It's okay, but God has not the sole possession to control human being, because human being is a supreme creature, and man has
Hello,
his own. Yes, any question?
sir. What is the difference between sonnet and epic?
Big difference. You see,
Okay.
sonnet is a small poem written in 14 lines. Okay, and sonnet can be a love sonnet, usually love sonnets. The theme is love, but epic is what tell. Are you an Odia? Are you an Odia? If you're Odia, then the Odia of epic is
Yes, sir.
Mahakavya. Yes, the Odia of epic is Mahakavya. So Mahakavya means it is always available in a number of books. One book is not sufficient. Ramayana is an epic. Mahabharata is an epic. Iliad is an epic. So it is having thousands of lines, but sonnet is having just 14 lines, very small. Okay, an epic contains a popular story of a particular culture, and the hero goes through a number of expeditions, adventures, and all that, and other elements also I told you. So it is something. It is a grand work. Epic is grand. Grandiorness is
Okay,
there,
okay, sir.
but
Then there means sonnet and epics both are different, sir. No?
totally different. Totally
Okay,
different.
sir.
Okay. So when you come to Milton, then Milton's time is Milton occupies a transitional period in history between two ages, because here what is happening, the Renaissance age is coming to an end, and a new age is emerging. The new age is Restoration age, because in the next class we go to Restoration age. So Renaissance, Milton is the last Renaissance poet, and he is the best among the Renaissance poets, and he occupies a transitional period. Transitional means two periods are there. One period is ending, another period is beginning. So that kind of a transitional period in the history between two ages. So his books are defining the intellectual and cultural traits of both the political elements, Renaissance elements, historical elements, and the religious elements. But so his presentation is totally different, and it is different because he was a supporter of Cromwell. He was a supporter of that. Because Cromwell, you see, when I come to the politics of England of that time, you'll find that let me give you a political background of that period. That in 1603, Queen Elizabeth, what to say, Elizabethan period, the Spencerian period. So the Queen Elizabeth of England died in 1603. First Queen Elizabeth, not this one who is now right now. So when Queen Elizabeth died, the throne passed onto the Tudors. Tudors are the royal dynasty of Scotland, because Queen Elizabeth did not have successor, so the throne of England passed to their, I mean, close descendants, that is Tudor group from Scotland. So the Scottish king James IV took the throne of England. He came from Scotland, James IV, and he occupied the throne of England with a new title, that is James I of England. James IV of Scotland came to England, occupied the throne of England as James I of England with a new title. Okay, and he occupied the throne in 1603. Obviously, when in 1603 Queen Elizabeth died, and King James I He remained on the throne up to 1625. So from 1603 to 1625, during the reign of rule of King James I, we call the period as Jacobean period. Jacobean period. Jacobean period means 1603 to 1625 under the rule of King James I, who was originally the Scottish King James IV. So let us remember him as James I because we are talking about England. So James I ruled England from 1603 to 1625. And during this period of James I, 3 to 25, 16, known as Jacobean period, there were several major transformations took place in English society. That was not positive. One of those important factors was that King James I did a mistake that he alienated the court from public interest. He ran his court, he maintained his court not for the public interest, he maintained his court for the royal interest. So he ignored public interest, as a result of which there was a public unrest taking place or immersed in the English society and getting it as a chance, getting it as an opportunity. Oliver Cromwell, who was by then the army general, he took the leadership of those people who was getting dissatisfied over the courtship of King James I. That was a major lacuna or major demerit of King James I. In addition to that, we also find there was a growth of population in English society. Obviously, as a result of which there was price rise, fall of economy, and widespread of poverty. I mean, English society became chaotic, as a result of which it led to social unrest. And in the meantime, an undercurrent was had already been processed against King James I, led by Oliver Cromwell, supported by another man, Thomas Fairfax. Both of them were from army. So Oliver Cromwell came to the front, supported by Thomas Fairfax, and they called their group, they called their, organization, parliamentarians. The parliamentarians made a revolution against King James I, and that James I group is called Royalists. So a civil war broke out in England in 1625, Gruha Juddha, civil war, the fight between people of same country among themselves. So the two groups of people, that is the Royalists and the parliamentarians, they fought, and the parliamentarians wanted to dethrone King Charles I. So in 1625, we find that Oliver Cromwell would succeed. And Oliver Cromwell dethroned Charles I, not only dethroned, they regicide. Means they killed. Regicide means the murder of a king. Suicide, self-murder. CID, side means murder. Regicide means murder of a king. So they regicide Charles I in 1625, and the throne of England was occupied by Oliver Cromwell, but it did not declare him as a king. It declared him as a public leader. It declared him as a public leader, and he designated a new term that is called Lord Protector. So Oliver Cromwell became the Lord Protector of England, Lord Protector of England, and he declared England as a Commonwealth. Commonwealth. England became not a kingdom, England became a Commonwealth because public government. And he is not the king, he is the Lord Protector. And Cromwell ruled England. And when you are ruling England, means obviously Ireland and Scotland is under your control. So he ruled England, Ireland, and Scotland till 1658. from 1625 to 1658. So in 1658, Cromwell died, natural death. Cromwell died naturally, and his party lost its control over the throne of England or the power of England, as a result of which the supporter of the royalists group, I mean the king's group, they invited the son of Charles I, that is Charles II, who had been exiled because in the civil war when his father was murdered, Charles II was exiled to sent to Nirbasam, exile. He was exiled to France. So he was staying in France. So Charles II was invited, and once again he was restored to the throne in 1660. Okay, and that period is called restoration period. Restoration means punarstapana, to restore someone. So which restored here? Charles II was restored here after the rule of Oliver Cromwell. And once again, we find the monarchical form of government, and that part, the restoration part, is in book 5. We shall discuss restoration literature. But dear learners, today we are discussing before that restoration. I mean, before that 1620 up to 1600, that 53 when Cromwell was there. So because uh, John Milton was a supporter of Cromwell, he was belonging to that parliamentarian group, or they were also called Roundheads, Roundhead, ROUNDHEAD, head Mundo, Roundhead group. So Oliver Milton was a supporter of that. That is the reason for which he presented his Paradise Lost by by focusing on Satan as the hero, because Satan was the voice of the people. So, and God was, according to Milton, he was the king, permanent king. So he was presenting the theory of that divine right theory. So that is the Renassa element that we find in each and every work of Milton. Is someone trying to ask any question? Okay, so now I'm coming to the biography of John Milton. That when you come, he's the only poet. No other poets are there. In this period, we are only having John Milton. John Milton's life is there from 1608 to 1674. And for your knowledge, John Milton was a Master of Arts. He completed his Master of Arts from Cambridge University in 1632. But and he was hello, okay, and he was offered a job to work in the church, but he flatly rejected it on the ground that he was influenced by the Protestant spirit, and he did not join any Roman Catholic church, and he preferred, and he became a poet and a scholar with some weighing erudition. Erudition means the high quality of language and profound knowledge in learning. So he was a man of learning, knowledge, intellectual capability, political awareness, and also a supporter of Oliver Cromwell. Because if, as I was telling you, someone, so it is disturbing. Someone, please mute the microphone. Someone has unmuted the microphone. Please mute it. It is disturbing the background sound. Please mute it. Someone has unmute. Okay, Protestant spirit. So first he expressed his Protestant spirit in his work. That is Aeropoetica. Aeropagitica. Aeropoetica. And Aeropoetica is a speech that Milton gave in 1644, and the speech was against the monarchical form of government and the acceptance of a public form of government, what is Cromwell's government. And it is also against a controversial speech on Bible. What is the controversial speech on Bible? That he wanted to explain that how God is an autocrat, how God is a permanent ruler, how God is exercising his monopoly on others, and how God suspended, because it is believed that earth and heaven was connected with a golden chain. So after giving cross to Adam and Eve, God suspended the golden chain. I mean, the direct access to heaven from earth for the human being is suspended by the God. So God is very much selfish and God is very much autocrat. He gave such punishment to the human mankind that simple disobedience. So God wanted to keep mankind in dark, in innocence, in ignorance, and because when you keep people in innocence and ignorance, it is better to rule over them as an autocrat. But Satan is which is a Renaissance spirit. Satan wanted to make men educate, make men aware, make men knowledgeable, and he did that. And as a result of which, man is suffering. So this is a criticism, a kind of criticism towards the Bible regarding the role of Satan and role of God that he publicly made in his speech, which is also published as Aeropagitica. So he was, so in a sense, when you look at the Milton, obviously you can develop your impression that he was a Renaissance humanist. He was a humanist, he was a supporter of mankind because he displayed Satan as the hero, and Satan was for the benefit of mankind, for the upliftment, Renaissance upliftment of mankind. Let men possess knowledge, let men possess awareness, let men know everything, let him not be in darkness, what God has done, what God has planned for him. So with this work in 1649, he was invited by Oliver Cromwell and he got a place in his party or in his team. And unfortunately, he became completely blind in 1652. And you know, in 1653, when Oliver Cromwell's government was seized to continue due to various reasons, then his supporters were arrested after the restoration of King Charles, and they were put in the jail behind the bars. And during his blindness period, he had recomposed this Paradise Lost. So if we come to the poetic career, then what tendency, because as the last Renaissance poet, what do we find here? That in one sense we find that he is a true successor of Spencer, because Spencer also used some Renaissance techniques which he carried on, but of course in his own design. So his poems are self-reflexive because his own ideas are reflected, his own interpretations are reflected, and he fused the classical heritage of Renaissance with the Christian spirit of Reformation. The classical heritage of Renaissance is there, the classical technique of Renaissance is there, but he is infusing it with the Christian spirit of Reformation. How Christianity should be reformed. Christianity, or what is written in the Bible, should not be accepted blindly or innocently. How that can be interpreted by your own intellectual capability of its merits and demerits. So his poetry was a spiritual vocation, divinely inspired by the religious muse. In Paradise Lost, we find muse. Muse means a divine power which can come to your mind to inspire you to write a grand work. Because you can write a small work, but you cannot compose a grand work. So if you go to Mahabharata, if you go to Ramayana, you will find what we call in Odia Mangala Charana. So the Mangala Charana, or the invocation, is always made by the poet, big poets, to goddess Saraswati in Indian tradition. Similarly, the divine muse in Greek mythology is there. A divine muse in English epic is also there. They pray the divine muse to get divine inspiration to compose. They believe that without this, that cannot take place. But that is why. And what else do we find here? The English nationalistic sensibility worked out in both humanist and Protestant religious terms. Two important terms he is using there. One is humanist, another is Protestant. Protestant spirit is there, the conventional religious faith, the conventional religious ideas are protested, objected, but not for the sake of objection, but for the sake of humanist point of view, from the humanitarian point of view, and that is the specialty, that is the uniqueness of his poetry. As because he was influenced by the classical poets like Homer, Ovid, Virgil, Cicero, Longinus, Horace. They are the Greek poets, and he was influenced by them of their classical works. But he reoriented their classical work with the contemporary Renaissance thought, contemporary Renaissance trend to make it modern. I mean, classicism has attended a new vocation in the hand of John Milton. And so you can, if you go to your book 4, you can find some of his poems are there. That is Lycidas in page number 20, El Allegro in page number 36, Il Penseroso in 37, and some sonnets are there in 41. So these poems are, I mean, Lycidas is Lycidas is an elegy, a death poem commemorating the death of Edward the King. But when he's writing that elegy, he's not writing it for the sake of mourning the death of Edward the King. He is very much reflecting all the Renaissance elements in
Sir, please
in
repeat
that
the
poem.
page numbers.
Lycidas, Lycidas, Lycidas in page number 20. Okay, El Allegro, L apostrophe Allegro, Allegro in page number 36, and Il Penseroso, Il Pensero, Penseroso in page number 37, and some sonnets are there in page number 41. So those are some of the poems which are typically given to you to see to understand, because explanations are also there, some footnotes are also available there. You can very well understand what is the Renaissance technique used by Milton in his own way, which is different from, he's in little bit Spencerian, but mostly he is having his own quality, he is having his own technique, and he is having his own, I mean, poetic grandiousness. So when you come to Paradise Lost, the masterpiece that is written in 67 in prison, then it is as I told you, it is the genesis story of the fall of man, and he is using the blank verse form. Blank verse I have explained in my first class, that 5-line stanza, iambic pentameter, but that is having no rhyming scheme. A, B, C, D, E, no rhyming scheme will be there, and it is written in the epic style. I told you some of the points of epic style. Epic style is always a grand one. It is about a hero having a long. It is a long narrative poem, having a cultural background. It represents some cultural ethos. A hero is there who is always in an exodus, in an adventurous journey to find certain value, to the search of a new value for the benefit of the society. It is influenced by the spirit of imperialism of his time. It is available in the volumes. The story of the epic does not start systematically. It starts in the middle abruptly, and we find here another important thing is that it is available in volumes, more than one books, and importantly, you will find the intervention of God and some divine elements, some supernatural elements in the book, like demons, ghosts, God, the godly creatures, the spirits, all those things are also available there, because we find Satan is here, God is here, heaven is here, hell is here, earth is here. This journey through space, when he's going through the space, he's coming across certain hurdles. Those are some of the divine elements, supernatural elements. You'll feel something grand in an epic style. So, but unconventionally, God is underestimated by Milton. God is put in the second fiddle. Satan is put in the first fiddle, because the Renaissance spirit is very much found in Satan, a Protestant voice against the divine right theory, a man with the imperialistic spirit to go for adventure, to make the voyage, to find certain things, and the imaginative spirit, the confidence there. So it is a allegorical reflection, you may say, of the political rebellion of Cromwell against Charles I of his time. So in that way, Paradise Lost is a grand one, a big one. It is purely based on the Protestant spirit, and it also advocates the egalitarian rule, the public ruling, the parliament, and because in the book opens, you find Satan is giving a speech in the meeting of his followers. So who are the followers? The common man, the common people. So the followers are the common people, and Satan is symbolically representing Oliver Cromwell, and how they are planning for a new form of society, new form of government, which will be deviating the traditional theory of divine right theory. So, in that sense, I mean, the only poet of the late Renaissance, Milton, who is great in that sense. So, you can see your book 4, and in certain pages, you can find the works
Sir,
also.
I'm not able to find it. Hello? Sir, I'm
It
not
is-
able to find.
Are you going through soft copy or hard copy?
Sir, soft copy.
Soft copy. So it is there. You see what is there from book 1 to book 10. It is in serial. So it is difficult for you to find. So when you are finding the topics, so you please go to at right side you will find the page that has been made by the Igno. But when you go to left side, you will find the original page numbers are there. So if you find, I'm just saying, if you find the unit 17 late Renaissance, unit 17 written as late Renaissance, did you find that? Unit 17, 17, late Renaissance. That is, see, unit 17, the late Renaissance.
Sir, in book number, book 4.
Yes, I'm giving the unit 17. There are units from starting unit 1, unit 2, unit 3. In that way, you will get unit 17, 17. At the top of the page, it is written. At the top of the page, it is written unit 17. Did you find?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that unit 17 is page number 9. Is it written there? Page number 9? You
Yes,
got
sir.
page number, then you roll on. And if you roll on, you will find then page 20, 36, 37, 41. Just roll on. You will get.
Yes.
So the page number that I have referred is very much there. In that page, you will find. Okay. Now the pages will be available to you. Any other doubt from anybody? Is anybody interested to interact? Any doubt? Yes.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes. Yes. Very much audible.
Sir, yesterday, due to the Amphan cyclone, I am unable to attend your classes, sir. How I
Acha.
find my classes?
You contact the regional center of Bhubaneswar. They will guide you. They will give you the link, and you can find that class because it is recorded and it is available to you even after the class is over. So if you Patel sir is there, one Patel sir is there. The number will be available to you on the net. Okay, regional center Igno Bhubaneswar. So if you give a call to them, they will give you a link. Okay, and through that link you will get the record of this class. If it is not available right now, you can get it 1 or 2 days after. It's not a problem.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Oh.
Thank you.
Sir, how many more classes are there?
Today is our 4th class. So another 4. Tomorrow there will be a class. Then Saturday, Sunday is off. Then again Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We have only 4 classes left.
Okay, 4 more classes left.
Okay. Only 4 classes are left.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Okay.
Sir, I don't have a hard copy. So when will I get a hard copy from sir university? Have you any idea about it?
No, that you can contact to the regional office. You can get it by getting a copy of this soft copies.
Soft copy I have, sir. Soft copy I have, sir.
You can find out. You can get the print of it, but that will be costly because every page will be around 4 to 5 rupees if you get the printout. So you just go through these copies, a soft copy. They will send because some of the learners have got their hard copy. They were saying, so they may be sending to you within a month, I think. Till then, you can make a contact with them. What is your study center?
Sir, Autonomous Khalikot College.
Oh, then actually, what is happening this time? They are not sending the book to study center. They are sending the book directly to the students. So better you contact to the regional office. That will be better, I think. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Sir, actually, what is eschatological criticism?
Criticism. So
Eschatological criticism.
that will be in your paper number 5. Your sir will explain it better. Okay.
Okay. No, it is actually given in book 1, block 1.
Okay.
MEG block 1 actually. Yeah.
Tell me the word.
Actually, it is the reader, however. Actually, it is from the writer's text to reader's work. It was given there.
Page number?
I understand archaeological criticism. It is in page number 27, book 1. MEG 1, book 1, block 1. Page number 27. Actually, I understand the part archaeological criticism because it dealt with that time's archaeological monuments which are set up there. But it's a bit difficult.
Can you repeat the word, please?
Eschatological criticism.
Eschatological.
Eschatological criticism.
Okay, I will explain it to you in the next class. Okay, just you remind me.
Okay.
I will. Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yes. Okay.
Milton's poetry is transcendent. Milton's poetry is transcendent.
Yes. Yes, it is transcendent because he's dealing with some divine theme, transcendental poetry, because some classical elements are there, divine elements are there. So it is transcendental. Transcendental means dealing with divine elements.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes. Yes.
Sir,
there's a question.
Yes. Please repeat.
So there's a question in the assignment that in Sonnets 23 and Sonnets 19, Milton reflects on blindness.
Which sonnets?
Miltonian sonnets, sir.
Miltonian sonnets.
Yes. Yes,
The
question was, would you agree that Milton reflects on blindness in Sonnets 19 and 23?
Yes.
Of course, by that time he was blind.
Yes.
So he addresses, but how he reasoned for that? Means only that he was blind, we cannot say that, na? So how he get a reasoned answer on that?
He reflects his own blindness because by that time he was blind when he wrote the poem. Okay. But in spite of his blindness, he had an awareness in his mind, because you see, after the blindness he wrote Paradise Lost. So even after his blindness, he has the internal awareness or internal vision to locate the society or locate the scenario.
Is it also about how blindly people follow the Roman Catholic practices?
Yes, it is also metaphorical.
Okay,
it is also metaphorical. Yes, it is also metaphorical.
Hello, sir.
Okay, welcome. Yes.
Sir, actually, I have not understood meter and various meters are there. So, can you explain about that?
Meter.
Yes, that pentameter, that decyclic meter, various meters are there. So I have not understood about that.
Did you attend my first class?
Yes, sir, but I am in late, sir. Came in late. So.
But today also, because it is difficult to repeat, because once I give the time for you, then the other things will not be done.
No, only say about the meter. What is meter, sir? That
meter means each line in a stanza is called meter. Each line in a stanza is called meter.
Okay. And stress and on-stress, sir. Then stress word and on-stress word.
Not word, syllable. Syllable is the vowel sound. Okay. So when you read it with an emphasis, it is stress syllable. When you read it lightly, it is on-stress syllable.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello. Yes.
Hello. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, audible.
Sir, please again tell me what is difference between metaphor and simile.
Okay, simile is a direct comparison between two objects. Okay, direct comparison between two objects by the use of words like as or like. Okay, for example, he fought in the war or he fought in the battle like a lion. So he fought in the battle like a lion. He and lion are compared like a lion. So he fought in the battle like a lion means as brave as a lion. So it is a simile. So bravery of the person is compared with a lion. But when we repeat that sentence, that is the sentence is he was a lion in the battle. He was a lion in the battle means idea is same but presentation is different. So he was a lion in the battle means he fought like a lion in the battle. But in this sentence, the comparison is indirect and we have not used any word like as or like. So it is a metaphor. Metaphor is indirect comparison. Simile is direct comparison. In simile, you are using as or like. In metaphor, you are not using it.
Okay. Sir, apart from similes and metaphors, is there idioms and phrases are used by metaphysical poets and Milton?
Yes, idioms and phrases are their personal choice. But because you are dealing with poems, you have to concentrate on the figure of speech. That's okay. So okay, we are now going to end of the class. Tomorrow again we shall meet at 10 a.m. Till then, goodbye. Namaskar. Have a good day.
Have a good day, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Have a good day, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sir.